Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. Welcome to this session of the EMCC Global Provider Summit. We are absolutely thrilled to have EMCC UK in the house leading this. Rachael is the president of EMCC UK, also owner-director of the Team Lab. Hannah's here, Knowledge Exchange Director, Census Coaching. Sarah Bailey, Professional Development Director for EMCC UK, and also Alison Mitchell from EMCC UK and EMCC Global, Head of Research Development. It's brilliant to have you all here with us today. The Super Four here are going to be leading a fantastic conversation around applying diversity, equality and inclusion to team coaching and mentoring practice. We've got 90 minutes. We've got to have a fantastic conversation. I'm going to hand you straight over to Rachael.
Thank you so much. It's brilliant to be here. We're super excited to be presenting today. I guess I just want to say that really, certainly Hannah, Sarah and I are here as very much as practitioners, not experts in this field. I'm sure you've all got lots that you can share with us and we can learn a lot from you. And Alison, as I described her just before we started, is our wise owl in the EDI space, and she's going to share and get us started with kind of framing the day and what we're going to talk about in our session today. And then there'll be lots of time later to go into breakout groups and also to have some discussion together. So I'm going to hand over to Alison now.
Absolutely delighted to see you all here today. And I've started this with a question, which is why inclusion? Why now? And I think one of the things that it kind of highlights today is there were over 200 people signed up for this workshop, and I counted the countries, and 47 countries were represented in that sign up. And with only 200 countries in the world, that's a lot of interest across the world. Now, absolutely accept that for each country, there are different priorities, different cultures and so on. So we'll be presenting from a UK perspective, but there's lots of things there that can apply to everyone. Okay, so I think generally speaking, the legal, the moral, the business case, the social justice case for workplace equality, diversity and inclusion is well made. There's a top employers survey that says that over 1,600 organisations globally, 91% see diversity and inclusion as key business imperative. And so why? Putting aside the social justice, the case for the business is in terms of diversity in ideas, creativity and innovation make a huge difference to businesses. But it's not enough to put in place, some of you may have in your countries, for example, unconscious bias training. The road to inclusion is not by formal training. It's about practice and moving towards an ownership of self, towards conscious inclusion. And that's where I think coaching and mentoring have a lot to offer, because the journey to inclusion starts with self. Before we start, I just thought to consider this. I'm going to offer you some information about the terms equality, diversity and inclusion that may help you take this through, particularly since you're coming from different countries today. So diversity. Diversity is the requirement, if you like, the foundation, the groundstone for innovation, creativity and social justice. But when organisations focus on diversity alone, it doesn't necessarily create those outcomes for everybody. It doesn't necessarily tackle systemic challenges around equality, personal bias, or exclusion. And so, again, this is somewhere where coaching and mentoring can play a part. Equality, again, just because you have a diverse workshop doesn't mean to say that everyone has the same experience or of opportunities. And so those two things have to go together. And then we have inclusion. And so I noticed someone's just put in the chat about B for belonging. Absolutely. Inclusion, inclusive organisations support employees regardless of background or circumstance to thrive at work. People feel valued and accepted without having to conform. And So what is the ultimate test of an inclusive environment? It is absolutely that people feel they have a sense of belonging and that they can contribute their best self. So with my other role on, I'm actually Director of Inclusive Development at Eleanor Glanville Institute, University of Lincoln in England. And we specialise in looking at inclusion from different perspectives. So here's a little summary of where we work. Our vision is to enable individuals, organisations to embed inclusive culture and increase diversity through conscious inclusion. And the conscious inclusion is the key word there. Our purpose is to develop lots of resources and to conduct research in those areas. Our activities focus on what we would call behavioural inclusion, acting in an inclusive way for both people and systems. And our model is about co-development with key agencies and individuals. Co-development, co-creation and inclusion are actually the principles by which we work in the Institute. Now, as part of that, we created micro-credentials. These are fairly well across Europe. I think they're in Australia as well. And for us, they're postgraduate short courses for professionals and people in the workplace. So one of the courses we have developed, building on our principles for the Institute, is called Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Literacy, ABC Literacy of EDI. And our approach to this has been to explore the concepts of EDI, Equality, Diversity and Inclusion, from different perspectives. There is no one perspective on this. We hope that in that journey, people will develop and deepen their knowledge and build their understanding of EDI. You see, the thing about micro-credentials is they tend to be for professionals who come with experience to the learning, and that creates a whole richness that you don't get necessarily in other ways. Gain those personal insights into self and a deeper appreciation and understanding of others. If we think of the model of self to others to organisations in terms of unconscious inclusion, then and then conscious inclusion, then I think it resonates very well with principles of coaching and mentoring and indeed supervision. And we hope, as a result of this, that we will enable people to develop original thinking and be inclusive in their work, in their community, or wherever it might be. So before I pass on to Hannah, I'd just like to acknowledge the three presenters here today who very, very generously gave of their time to participate in the pilot of this micro-credential. And what they're going to share with you is their learning and application of that in practice. So again, thank you everybody for taking part. Over to Hannah.
Alison, sorry, could I just ask you a quick question before we pass on to Hannah, because I noticed it came up in the chat and I just want to clarify it before we move on. But we said it was you said it was a UK perspective. Could you just clarify what you mean by that so that everyone understands?
Yes, most certainly. And I think this is something to be very aware of. The basic principles of inclusion are ubiquitous. That sense of belonging, that sense of equality, that sense of self-worth, that sense of coming with, and delivering with your best self, all of that. But different cultures, different countries, different legislation brings communities to that point in different ways. So I say the caution about this being a UK perspective, because noticing the different countries that you all come from, you will find it possible to interpret what's being discussed into that background in terms of your own inclusion. I think why we're all here today, no matter where we've come from, is because we believe in inclusive communities. Is that okay, Rachel?
That's lovely. Thank you, Alison. So we're going on to Hannah now.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Beautiful.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
What your first slide, Hannah?
Yes, please. Slide 9. I was reminded of this earlier on this week, and the idea of who I am is how I coach. And I reflected back on the work that I'd done through the EDI literacy programme, and thought that this felt really, really true to me. I was reminded by the lovely Beth McManus, who I had a conversation with. And I'm really, really thrilled to be here today to be talking about my practice, but that is where I'm coming from today. I'm going to be talking about how I use the work that we did on the programme and how I've worked with it internally, and then how I've developed what my thinking is around EDI and how that has then moved into my practice. One of the first places that I went to, I mean, the course itself was very, very reflective, and it asked an awful lot of reflective practice from us, which for me is great, because I'm very deliberate about my reflective practice. I take lots of time to consider every session, to consider every contract. So I really like to sort of play about with my reflection as well. And as you can see, I've included some of my reflective practice on this slide. So, you know, in terms of writing blogs, using imagery. But I have to be really honest with you and say that some of the reflective practice was really hard, and it landed really hard as I started learning and I started reflecting on myself and where I might stand in relation to equality, diversity and inclusion. And so then I was able to start to layer it up. And I was able to start to take notice what was going on for me, some of the discomfort that I felt, and there was discomfort, some of the feelings of shame, of guilt, of doubt, all of that started to play out for me. And how do I actually start to work with this? And like I say, for me, reflective practice has got light and shade in it. And so it was really important that I started to hold on to that in a safe way that would enable me to really think about my practice, think about how I can show up, how I can turn up as a coach, as myself, but actually be in service of the client that's in front of me. And like I say, raised a lot of fear and a lot of questions. And so then I took that to supervision. When I think about reflective practice, it's really easy for me to start to, talk about Gibbs and Kolb and different models that we might use. But in actual fact, for me, reflective practice is something more whole than that. And reflective practice isn't just about the work that I do on my own. It's about the work that I also do with others. So with my peers in reflective practice. But supervision played an enormous part in developing my practice around EDI, but also around thinking about my own personal position in relation to EDI as well. And so, like I say, like that idea of casting shadow, of it being dark and it being quite gloomy at times as well, but also being able to see that there's light in this. And this is work that I really felt as though I needed to do. So that idea of not only reflecting by myself, but reflecting with peers. And so encouraging those alternative perspectives, other voices, and so that I didn't become wrapped up in my own stuff. Knowing what is mine was a really important part of this as well. So knowing that I wasn't projecting into my client conversations, in coaching conversations, that I wasn't holding this to a point that I felt as though I was kind of trying to elbow it in some way, that it was actually part of a natural, organic coaching conversation with clients. And that was a really important part for me. So in terms of where did I start to play around with this? And I think that one of the big, and they feel as though they're quite simple coaching questions, but they felt incredibly big when I started to ask and started to try to answer them for myself. So if in this space I do nothing, who am I saying no to? And that was quite a powerful question for me. So who are the people, who are the groups that I am saying no to if I do nothing? When I do nothing, who am I saying yes to? So, and that again was another unbelievably powerful question for me. So for me, it was about creating questions that really raised my feeling, my self-awareness, but also my thinking around this as well. So what are the risks of me continuing to work in the way that I do and not developing my practice? And again, really thinking about that quite deeply. And if I stay where I am, and if I stay afraid to ask certain questions of myself, then what does that really say about my coaching practice? If I'm not prepared to go there myself and do the work for myself, then again, what does that say about me as a coach and the way that I choose to practice? So I then got to the point where I thought, right, what is next? For me as a coach, where do I go next? So in terms of when I thought about the coaching practice, this fell into two fairly key areas for me. And there was a personal element as well as a professional element. And so personally and professionally, I needed to prepare myself to be called out. So when I get it wrong and when I make mistakes and when I fail, that I've got to be ready to listen and to stay curious and to avoid feeling as though I've got to start to defend myself, which would actually be going against a set of values that I hold quite dear, but I'm not really sure I was living them out in the whole sense. And I'm still not. I'm still I'm working on it. And I think this is going to be a lifelong practice for me. I don't see it as a piece of work that's got a destination to it. It's actually a road that I'm on and I'm traveling on that road. So be open to listen. And if somebody shows me the courage and the bravery to call me out, which does take courage and bravery, then I can do them the service of taking notice and listening. And I established 3 A's for myself, which is to appreciate. And this really worked with my nervous system as well. So it worked to kind of hold that safely for me. So appreciate and say thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to say what you've just said. Acknowledge what they've said. So I'm repeating back, I'm recalling, I'm paraphrasing so that I know that I've understood what's been said as well. And then to stay curious and ask questions. And so they stayed really, and still do stay really close to me as my 3 A's that I keep for me to be able to acknowledge feedback that is given to me from a brave point of view. And then the idea of being called, of calling people out as well, of calling out, but also owning my own stuff as well. And these two spoke closely together. So choosing courage over comfort, in the words of Brené Brown. And making sure that I offer curiosity from my personal perspective as well, which is a big one for me, because what I did notice about myself was that if I did have a tendency to call people out, I was more likely to shame and blame, and I was more likely to come from that place rather than staying in a kind of beautiful coaching space. So I needed to acknowledge that I might be being triggered by this as well. So noticing what my triggers were became a really important part of my practice. And then the final part, which I'm sure isn't the final, but it's where I'm resting at the moment, is to get off my steed and remove the halo, is to recognise that I am not a saviour in discrimination, that I am in this, I'm on the playing field with other people, and I want to be on that playing field. But like I said, I am going to get it wrong, but to actually understand that I am not there to rescue other people and disempower other people because they are capable of rescuing themselves. So not to talk on the behalf of others, but to talk on my own behalf and to come from a perspective of, I own this. This is my experience, and this is how I'm experiencing what's going on right now. And then the final bit was the professional. And how do I bring that into coaching practice? And again, working with the client, and a lot of us will be familiar with working with culture. And when we're working certainly with leaders, that culture plays a big part. And we might hear things like, are they on the bus or are they off the bus? And that kind of phrasing. And so the way that I've been able to use this, and very sensitively, again, because this has been a very emotive piece of practice for clients. And when I've said, what would belonging, how do you think belonging would respond right now? What would belonging ask of you if belonging was in the room? And so the questions that I'm going to go away with for today are, how would belonging respond to my 10 minutes? So when I do my reflection from this session, how would belonging respond, and what would it ask of me in response to the 10 minutes of talking that I've just done. And how would diversity feel in this session? And how would inclusion speak up in light of this session? And so I kind of want to invite you to potentially roll those questions around for yourself as well. So thank you. And I will now pass you over to Sarah.
Thanks very much, Hannah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could I have the next slide, Rachel, please? Yeah. So in my approach to doing this presentation, I was also informed not only as my EMCC role, but also my role in my everyday job of being Director of Student Engagement, Wellbeing and Success at a HE Institute. And in that role, my team coordinates a lot of mentoring, peer mentoring schemes. So what I wanted to share to you today was my reflections as a mentoring practitioner in terms of what the course has given me, and also increased awareness and learning, and in a practical sense, because I'm quite a practical person, the positive action that I have taken already and action that I intend to take in the future. So one of the first questions, I've worked in higher education for over 2 decades, and in that time I've set up and managed mentoring provision for a diverse community of students and staff at many institutions, including the UK and overseas. What I loved about taking part in the EDI course was the first question that they asked, which is, why does EDI matter to me? And the first things that I came up with, the first thoughts that I came up with was access and opportunity. And I think that's also informed by my work and that I work with students, particularly from poorer areas of London, from diverse communities, and have witnessed how barriers can stop them from achieving their goals. Including, having low social capital, lack of access to networks and opportunities, which can promote a lack of self-confidence, lack of self-belief, and demotivate them. So for me, being robust in terms of and being mindful and being positive and active in EDI, it can help to play a very important part, especially where mentoring is concerned as well. In terms of innovation and creativity, it can lead to more innovation and creativity in terms of problem solving. People have a different understanding and life experiences from different communities and different walks of life, and that can inform problem solving, because there's information coming from different sources and experiences. Valuing difference. Well, as mentoring and coaches, mentoring practitioners and coaches, we should be aware more than others sometimes of the importance of seeing people as unique individuals, because that is what we do. We talk to individual people on a regular basis, and that our differences can be our strengths. There is real strength in difference and what we bring, what we all bring to other people's lives as well as our own. Hannah was talking about the painfulness of challenging biases, and that was pretty painful for me as well, actually, because having worked for many years with diverse communities and in poorer neighbourhoods as well. You think, oh, you have a pretty good understanding, but actually I don't, because different people have different journeys, and it's challenging my biases in terms of mentoring, for example. I tended to view it, and still do sometimes, as a magical panacea for, helping people to redress, the inequalities in society, that it can help them to achieve. It can break down those barriers. So for me, it was asking those questions of, why do I think it is, or how can I break it down? What are my biases in terms of what makes a good mentor? For example, I can look at sometimes people that we're recruiting as mentors and think, that person's going to be a good mentor. What informs that? what unconscious bias informs that? What is informing my thinking of that judgment, actually? Another example, who can benefit from mentoring? Well, I think I think these people can benefit from mentoring. Those people can benefit. What's informing my thinking of that? So I had to really think quite deeply about what is informing my thinking. And also, one thing in terms of my existing beliefs as well in relation to mentoring was my impatience, if you like, sometimes of thinking that, people who don't access mentoring, why don't they access mentoring? They should be accessing mentoring support, because it's going to be really good for them. So actually it was quite challenging in terms of why wasn't I asking questions as to why aren't they accessing mentoring? Why do they not trust the process? What is it about the existing processes that they don't see as accessible? So I think those are important questions when you're looking at providing mentoring provision, particularly for schemes for younger people and people from diverse communities. So the emerging question is, it's very simple. What more can I do? My learning. So what I picked up, what I gained, actually, there's quite a lot of what I gained, and I put quite a bit in the slide here. Practical processes, practical methods, appreciative inquiry, which I've spelt wrong there, so I'm sorry. It's actually an I, didn't spot that. Appreciative inquiry, which I loved because it's a positive approach to problem solving. So when you're looking at schemes, it's very people focused. It focuses on what you're doing well, what works well, and that's your starting point, rather than thinking this is a problem. And what that does is it opens up that optimism of what might be, the designing, what should be, what will be. And it's really, really useful in looking at particular projects that you're doing in terms of mentoring. Action learning sets as well, usually used for big organizational questions. But I thought that the action learning sets can be used in terms of, with coordinators and supervisors, for example, answering those key strategic questions and key specific questions in terms of what can we do better in setting up mentoring provision for and making it more inclusive as well. Equality impact assessment as well. I'm not an HR professional, so I've never actually done one before. So actually the holistic nature of that, it blows your mind, actually, where you are really looking at the consequences of your provision and your functions, and breaking down every little bit of how that has a consequence and impacts particular different groups, and doing that really helps you to think more holistically about what your provision is. There are some theories that really resonated with me, in particular the identity theory and role identity, personal identity in terms of ourselves, our uniqueness, our related behaviours, our internal role expectations, how our identities our multiple identities can act as motivators and actually guide our behaviour, how social identity we can be part of in-groups and out-groups. And all of this is, for me, very important in terms of mentoring and thinking about the role of mentoring and the in-groups and out-groups in terms of mentoring as well. Can we create in-groups by, having a set of mentors and thinking about our mentoring recruitment? Power. So Lucas and Baxter highlight that research indicates that members of disadvantaged groups, such as women and minorities, will have decreased influence and face challenges in acquiring and using power. And it got me thinking about mentoring, the mentoring power balance, and how the mentor, in most cases usually has a more powerful position, really, even in peer mentoring, because there's always the mentor knows a little bit more, maybe more experienced in a particular area. So it got me thinking about recruiting when we're recruiting mentors, are we actually supporting existing power structures? Are we thinking about our recruitment? Who are the people who are coming forward as mentors? Who are the people who are not coming forward as mentors, and why is that? How can we empower different groups by encouraging them to take on roles as mentors for others? So the practical. So what actions have I taken? Well, already within my role as Director of Student Services, we've implemented, we were already monitoring diversity within the schemes, but looking at more proactive recruitment from, people from different cultures and backgrounds. Also, including more representation for people to diverse backgrounds in our marketing. The marketing is really important, that people can see that it's something that speaks to them. It is a community that they can join. It is representative of them. So, looking at video blogs, video testimonies, online blogs, photographs, including more voices, including more social media content. Changing the application forms, for example. In terms of, these stilted questions of why do you want to be a mentor? Instead of saying, tell us more about yourself, tell us more about your life experiences, we want to hear a little bit more about your story. And reasons for wanting to be a mentor or mentee, asking a few deeper questions in that area. Also helps with the matching process, by the way, with that as well. Training. Now, training, as well as the basic things of making the room more accessible, and the timings, making timings for, people who are parents, people who are, people who have lives outside, making the timings more convenient. Having more EDI training embedded in the training of mentors, for example, having more reflective sessions and allowing them to examine their own biases, more learning around cultural awareness, also crucially inviting diverse voices and people from all different life experiences to come in and talk to the mentors about their experiences, so that they're sharing those lived experiences with them. Role plays as well with different scenarios. So that's in terms of what's been implemented in the training. Ongoing continuing professional development for mentors, further EDI training, feedback groups, particularly using the approaches that I talked about before in terms of appreciative inquiry or action learning sets, and also encouraging mentors and mentees to actually talk externally about their experiences of mentoring, going out there and talking more about their journey and sharing their journey within organizations and externally. And finally, I came up with I know it's a rough draft of a research question, but I've always wanted, and this is what this course did for me as well, I always wanted to do more research in relation to the role of the mentor and how it can help shape identity from those from different protected groups. And what I mean by protected groups from a UK perspective is the groups that are listed in the Equality Act. So that would be age, sex, race, disability, religion or belief, sexual orientation, gender reassignment, marriage or civil partnerships, and pregnancy and maternity. So that's a brief list for you. Obviously, I couldn't look at all of these groups, but it's this question that I think is really important, I think, for me, and also how can involvement in mentoring schemes, especially as a mentor, help shape identity of those from different protected groups who are also from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. There's an intersectionality question there as well, because people have more than one protected characteristic. Well, that's my research question. I'm sure it will be reformed, but it's also a question out to you. Perhaps I can get some help today on that, but still learning, as Hannah said, always learning. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you, Hannah and Sarah, for those deeply personal accounts. I hope the audience appreciate how challenging it is sometimes to talk about these things, particularly when we're talking about it from such a deeply personal perspective. So just want to appreciate that. And you both showing the vulnerability to speak up about that. So thank you. I just want to now talk about team coaching, which is the area that I tend to work in and focus on. And like Hannah and Sarah, I've done a lot of reflective thinking. In fact, if I'm honest, I probably think about this subject every single day. That's how seriously I take it. And I know I make mistakes, and I know I get things wrong. And I think we all have to be open and prepared to accept that and to acknowledge it and to learn from it. And I think one of the things that the course helped me with in the discussion and dialogue that we had in between each module was really hearing others' perspectives, but also people challenging things that each other was saying. And I think what became obvious was that no one has the right answer. So I think the humility and the vulnerability to realize that is incredibly important. So the course enabled me really to look at myself, my work, and the outcomes of what I'm doing. And not only how I'm being, which I think Hannah and Sarah have both talked about really eloquently, but also what am I doing? You know, what am I actually doing by intervening with a team? What impact will I have as I enter the system? And I'm going to share a little slide with you in a moment to talk a little bit more about that. But some reflective work, stepping back from what I'm doing and thinking, why has this organization chosen me as a team coach? What is it about me that I represent? Is it just my skills and my expertise? But actually, what else are they bringing into the organization? I know that because of my name, people have a particular view of who I am, double barrel surname, that immediately, certainly in the UK, people have a perspective of my socioeconomic background. They're actually usually totally wrong. And quite often clients will say to me, you're not really who we thought you were when we first started working with you. I quite like that because I can use that to my advantage. But there is something about who are you and why have you been chosen to do the work? There's another question on the reverse of that, which is who hasn't been chosen to do the work and who isn't in the room. So which voices are not being represented? And if you co-coach, thinking about who you coach with, why you chose to coach with that person, what you both bring and what you don't bring, what background, what experience, what knowledge, what life experience that's missing when you walk into the room. So I think some really deep reflective work about my clients and the work I'm doing with them and what I represent to them was a great outcome of this work. And I think, to be honest with you, it's a lifelong learning. I really struggle when people say they're experts in diversity and inclusion, because I really struggle to see how anybody could be an expert in this space. It's so complex. There's so much involved in it. We work as Alison said, we work in an international context now. And I view this as something that we, as Hannah said, is a lifelong learning. So that's sort of one area. Another area I would say is thinking about why you're there. So as a team coach, if you're working with a team to become a high-performing team, at what cost to other people in the organization? So thinking beyond just the team you're working with and looking at the objectives they're trying to achieve or they want to achieve. By achieving those objectives, what will that mean to the rest of the organization, to their people, to their colleagues, to their key stakeholders, both inside and outside of the organization? I think that's a question we very rarely ask ourselves. What are we there in service of? What do we want to achieve? What will happen if the team achieve those objectives? What are the downsides as well as the upsides? I think we very rarely think about that in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Certainly, it's not something I've thought about in the past. So some really sort of almost before we start the work with the team, what are we there to achieve? Why are we there? What do we represent? and what's missing, and what are the downsides of the work that we could be doing. I'm going to go now onto my one slide. I'm just going to check in the chat. Yes, Peter Hawkins, yes, who I trained with. You'll be surprised to hear, Harriet. Anyway, so this is a slide that I used as part of my master's dissertation. I looked at endings in team coaching, but I think it works really beautifully to describe what Alison was talking about at the very beginning of our presentation. So that when we're thinking about working with a team, really we're stepping into a system of which we, as I've mentioned earlier, contribute something. And this is based on work about researching teams and all the different aspects of teams that we can research. And I can share with you a link to the paper later if you're interested. But as a team coach, we're stepping into a system. And by the way, this is one team within an organization. So imagine if you then multiply this, the level of complexity that we're working with is absolutely phenomenal. And I think that's why I firmly believe that some learning and knowledge and self-awareness about diversity, equity, inclusion is so important whilst we do this work, really knowing what we're bringing and what we're walking into. So we're looking at, if we sort of step outside and broader lens, to Alison's point, we're looking at things here from a UK perspective. So from that point of view, the political, economic, social, technological, legal and environmental issues. And of course, when you're working in an organisation that's in a singular context, i.e. one country, you may be looking at specifically that context. But in business, so few businesses now are purely based in one country, and so few teams have people that come from a singular country or a singular context. So awareness of that is really, really important. So to know, if you like, as the fish, the water in which you're swimming, is to understand that and have an awareness of that. And that's, of course, from an economic and a legal perspective, where HR is so important in supporting you on that. Then you look at the organisation itself. So who is the organisation? We're talking a lot about structure at the moment, about hybrid working, flexible working. I think there's some awareness about how that impacts DEI issues as well, in terms of who has access to that, who doesn't. You know, there's a lot of talk about what I would call white collar workers, so office workers, but what about people who work in hospitals? What about people who work in schools? Sarah, you mentioned higher education. Many of those people don't have the opportunity of flexible working. So, you know, by going down that route, who are we excluding? Who are we not talking about? Who are we not thinking about? If we're working with a leadership team, you know, it might be fine for them to work at home 3 days a week, but it may well be that many of their staff can't. So again, who are we excluding and not thinking about and not bringing into the conversation? Then we look at the sort of the structural features. So what's the task of the team? What are they there to do? The level of complexity they're working in, what technology is available, the interdependence of that team with other teams. They don't work in isolation. So who else are they reliant on? How virtual they are, what's their power, you know, are they in a leadership team? Are they not in a leadership team? So then we look at skill, authority, and we look at the roles that they're holding. We then look at the team themselves. So who's in the team, who isn't in the team? Really important question, really important question. The ability, the level of education of the people in the team, their demographics, so again, diversity, their functions, their personalities. You know, so you may look at Alison, Sarah, Hannah and I and think, well, we're all white women. But actually, there's an awful lot more diversity there than just how we look. So really getting beneath that and understanding that. Then looking at the team management systems, so their shared understanding, whether psychological safety exists and how that exists, who's the curator and protector of that. Also looking at what we call the mediating mechanisms, so individual motivations, how conflict is dealt with within the team, how information and where information is shared, who takes action, the interpersonal processes and dynamics that go on within that team. Is creativity encouraged? Is there team cohesion? Who makes decisions and why? And the level of trust. So as I talk you through there is an awful lot there to think about. And I guess what I'm saying to you is, if you approach all of those aspects with the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's so much for us to do as team coaches. And that's one team. And then moving beyond that, there's the stakeholders of the team. So they're people, the other teams they work with, the employees and the organization, and then potentially as well, the external stakeholders, thinking about who owns the business. Are there investors? Are there shareholders? Is it a public sector business? Is it there to serve society? Is it there to make money? So I think as team coaches, stepping back from all of these aspects and considering them through the lens of diversity, equity, inclusion takes us to some quite different conclusions and reasons for us being there. So I'm just going to check in the chat, and I'm noticing the time, but I'm seeing if there's anything here. Yeah, okay. So what I'm going to say is we're coming up to 1:45. We've done, we've done sort of 50 minutes of dialogue and talking. We're all going to offer you, so both myself, Hannah, Sarah and Alison are all going to go into breakout rooms. You're very welcome to come and join us and to ask us some questions specifically around our areas of expertise. But you're also very welcome to move between the rooms, so you don't have to stay in one room. You can sort of hop between one another and join us. We're going to have 25 minutes. We've got a little bit of time, and then we'll come back into the whole group. We'll reflect what we've talked about in the breakout rooms, and then we'll obviously open it up for dialogue to the whole group. But of course, the breakout rooms are also for dialogue, questions, conversations, and we'd love to hear from you about your experiences too. So I think hopefully the breakout groups will appear in a moment. Ta-da, brilliant. We'll all join our rooms and we'll look forward to seeing you online. Thank you.
Back in the room.
Yeah, thank you. We had some fantastic conversations in our room. I'm going to invite Hannah. Do you want to just share some highlights of the things that you talked about, which would be brilliant?
The reflection that we got to was actually about reflection, and was asked, where did this start for me? And I said, in actual fact, it was probably pre-COVID that it really started. And it was, and so the work started around one of my grandchildren came home from school, and they'd been doing about kindness in school. And so it was the idea that reflective practice, for me, reflective practice has light and shade. It is. And I always say, rather than seeing reflective practice as like a linear model or a circular model like Gibbs and Kolb, that actually it's more like if I could describe it as an object, it's more like a glitter ball. There's light and shade, there's light that shines on it, it mirrors back to us. And so there's an awful lot of really rich data in there. And we talked about that there's rich data that comes out of it's very fertile. The darker, the harder stuff to work with can be incredibly fertile. But we also touched on training as well. So what does that mean for training? And if as trainers we are holding space for people to engage in reflection, what does that mean? And we talked about the need for the psychologically safe space for people to explore doubts, for people to be able to explore fear, shame, and all of those feelings that can go with. And again, I mean, I'm not saying they're all dark feelings, they're not. There's some unbelievable light, but actually that the psychologically safe space was really important, and the underpinning of appropriate supervision as well for people who might not be ready to be vulnerable in a safe space and might need additional support. So making sure that the mechanisms and systems of support are properly in place before embarking on a reflective piece that is might be emotionally demanding of people.
Sarah, would you like to share what you discussed?
Yeah, well, we were talking about challenging assumptions and where those assumptions might come from in terms of, and I was and how how painful process that can be not painful but uncomfortable anyway, can be painful for some people as well. You know, and how it's unconscious. You know, we have our biases, but also our unconscious biases that we may be thinking things that if we don't, you know, if we don't have that space to reflect on why we're thinking that, these habits of mind and these assumptions will continue. Julia from our group shared a great example of setting up a scheme. And setting up the scheme in an unstructured way, in a particular company, and she'd set it up, and she set it up in an unstructured way because the environment of this company was quite structured, and she thought it'd be quite nice, or it'd be quite a good process to kind of do it as an unstructured and make it easier and more inclusive for participants. However, she said that she'd assumed that the participants as a group would make it more accessible, would find it more accessible and easier to partake in, but that there were a couple of people within that group who were neurodiverse and couldn't handle the lack of structure. So that led on to a conversation of thinking about, again, thinking about when you're running schemes or setting up schemes, thinking about people as groups rather than individuals and what the individual needs may be. You know, that people make up groups. And sometimes when you're designing a particular scheme and you're thinking about the structure of it, you can't make assumptions about what that group, you know, how it will work for that group, how it will work well for that group, whether they will have a sense of belonging, all of those things. So I thought that was very interesting as well. We were also talking about, there was another participant, Jess, who was saying about having the importance for mentors, you know, people who run mentoring schemes, to have supervision in terms of, you know, having that space, that psychological safe space, to talk about why the reasons, and reflecting on the reasons why they have those assumptions. So you know, having that reflective safe space, so you can move forward and you can challenge, not just challenging yourself, which is always quite hard. You can reflect as a practitioner, but you need other people sometimes to reflect with, and to help to guide your reflections a little bit more. We're talking about the research question in terms of identity and shaping identity. And I know there was a question in the chat earlier about, well, how can identity be shaped? But we were talking about that identity is made up of multiple components. We have our personal identity, we have our social identity, and within our internal identity is driven, you know, we have our self-expression. And so there are elements of our identities, or various identities, that can be shaped by our experiences and the roles that the further roles that we take. So that was interesting. It was an interesting one to finish on.
Sarah, sorry, Rachel, I just want to add to Sarah's, because if people are interested in critical reflection of assumptions, you might want to look at Brownhill, who does some beautiful work called Assumption Hunting, and also Mesereau, who does critical reflection of assumptions.
Anna,
and that works.
Can you put it in the chat? Can you put it in the chat?
Yeah.
Fabulous. Alison, we've got 5 minutes.
5 minutes, I'll be very quick. And disrespect to the group I was with, because it was a very animated conversation. But I think one of the key questions we started with, it was more, I tell you, it was exploring. It was reflecting and exploring. I don't know if people agree with that. It was kind of, So one of the questions came up was how to embed EDI in coaching and mentoring. General question. And we looked at and recognised cultural differences, legislative differences, and so on across countries and communities. And even explored the different meanings of the word inclusion, which is a good starting point for any consideration of this. Are we, that's why I kind of put that slide up. Are we thinking the same thing about inclusion? That's a good starting point. And then you can begin to think about inclusive behaviours. We reflected on individual dilemmas as a coach. Do I bring this to my coaching or do I not? Similar to my climate action concerns, for example, do I raise this? Do I not? Who do I exclude? Who do I include if I do that? And really thought about, it's about increasing awareness, sort of begin with the beginning, is self-reflection. What are my biases? What am I doing here? And I suggest at the end, and I don't know if those of you on the panel would agree, but I think one of the most useful tools, I think Rachael, you explained it, was the equality impact assessment tool.
Oh, that was Sarah. Yes.
Was it Sarah? Right, yeah. Sarah. Okay. And this basically says, if I do this, if I have this contract, if I go to this organization and work with this group, but not that group, if I do this, ask yourself a question. And then this is a tool that you can use to say, who am I including in that? Who am I excluding in that? And then reflect on how you can make a difference. And I personally think there's one perhaps takeaway you might have is to actually have a look at that. We could post something, I'm sure, on EMCC UK or whatever for people or global for you to look at some reference to that. But become aware by doing a kind of very simple impact assessment of your work. Okay, that would be it.
Thanks, Alison. And I would also add to everyone that we'll all be around for the next half an hour in the networking as well. So we can continue the conversation. I've absolutely loved the conversations we had in our team coaching room. We talked a lot about when we're working with teams, how we bring different voices and how people are heard. So both within the team, but then also within the wider organisation, and how we can support that. So we looked at that, and there was some really. We looked at things like fish bowls and how we do inquiry as we set up a team coaching assignment, and then how we create a safe space for the team, and that we don't try and boil the ocean straight away, and that actually it's a long-term process, building that psychological safety and trust. And then a really interesting conversation at the end around not putting people in a position where they feel forced to speak up, but to actually create the environment where people feel confident, particularly those who often are silenced or not heard and don't feel they have a voice. So it's up to us as the team coach to create the environment and to role model that, and to create the opportunity for people to speak up, but also to think about other ways that we can give people the opportunities to speak up beyond a group setting. So allowing people the opportunity to speak one-to-one, doing follow-ups and those sorts of things. So, and in view of that, I put my email address in the chat, and if the other speakers are happy to take direct emails, please feel free to put your email in the chat as well, because I'm aware that obviously there may be questions that people are sitting with, or areas that they want to explore that they don't want to talk about in front of the whole group. And I'm more than happy for people to contact me directly or connect with me on LinkedIn as well, if you want to follow up on the conversation, and get involved. And those that are in the UK, get involved if you're not with EMCC UK as well. I would say that, wouldn't I? But I haven't.
That's a lovely.
So we are a very, very inclusive organisation, and we're working incredibly hard to change things and shift things. And obviously the part of us three going on this programme was all part of that journey that we're on. So I think you have some questions you want to ask.
I do, but before we get to that, can I just thank all four of you for leading this wonderful conversation? I think that you've opened up lots of new thinking and new ideas, and it's been evident that in your breakout rooms you were really able to really share and inspire each other as well. So thank you to everybody. But I've got one more question for everybody actually before we go into the breakout, so don't run off just yet. So I'm going to ask each of our four hosts here, just in 20 seconds or so, to just tell me one after the other what they're taking away from the session today. And while they're talking, perhaps you could do the same in the chat as well. So just to write in the chat, what are you taking away from this session? And I'm going to invite, who would like to go first? I'm going to invite Rachael to just give me 20 seconds, just a couple of sentences about what you're taking away from this session.
I'm taking away curiosity. I'm loving the curiosity that I'm getting from people, and the sense of really wanting to engage with this incredibly, and I won't even call it a topic, it's a way of living, a way of being. It's who we are in essence about what we're doing as coaches, mentors, supervisors, leaders of organizations. So I'm really thrilled that so many people have joined us, and I just feel really heartened by that. And I hope that the needle will keep moving, because we have a very, very, very long way to go.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rachel. Same question to Sarah.
I'm taking away more learning, actually. I found this session incredibly, listening to the other speakers and listening to people who've joined us for the group and their experiences, further learning and motivation to learn more. I'm a very curious person, and I've been really inspired, and I always am inspired by fellow practitioners in coaching and mentoring, and how knowledgeable they are and how much I can learn from them. So always more learning. I absolutely love it.
Thank you. Same question to Hannah.
Mine will not take 20 seconds. It's everybody's generosity today. I think people have been on the pitch, so to speak. I think everybody's turned up and everybody's taken part. So appreciation and generosity are 2 words.
Thank you, Hannah. And Alison?
Well, I think I'd just like to show my appreciation to my co-presenters, who have taken, if you like, a belief, a concept in terms of the training package that we developed, and have turned it into something very real. And I'm going to take away that I really do feel that the impact of 2 things. It's a 2-way gate. Impact of practicing inclusion on coaching, and the contribution that coaches can make to inclusion. And yes, I want to appreciate that from all of your contributions, actually. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to all 4 of you, and thank you to everybody here. And thank you for everybody's putting their reflections in the chat as well. This is the kind of dialogue that really does inform EMCC global strategy going forward as well. So we need to make sure that we have this running through our veins as much as we possibly can, and if not more than we possibly can. It is absolutely important and imperative. So this has been a really, really useful and valuable conversation. Thank you very much.
Nicola, can I just add that I'm hoping either today or tomorrow there'll be a joint statement by all the coaching, supervision and mentoring professional bodies in the UK with regard to DEI training, as it being an integral part of coaching training going forward. So look out, everyone, if you're in the UK, for that statement. It should be out this week. But it's another part of us starting to really move the needle on this topic.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that, Rachel. Thank you.